Continuing where we've left in the previous video, let's now add implementation of this send activation email method. First of all, let's type in this user argument. It's going to be instance of the user class. And what it will return is going to be Boolean. So let's just add some doc blocks here. It takes parameter user, returns Boolean. And we will simply say send activation email. Now within this method, we are first going to reset the token on the user. So user reset token. So let's quickly have a look at what this method does. As you may remember, we obviously created this method in one of the previous videos. We are setting the token field to email address, which is run through this MD5 function, and then we save it so that record is persisted to the database. So now we have this token within the database associated with this given user, and we return this token so we can actually use it with whatever else we might need outside of this method. But in this specific case, we don't need to store it in any variable. We just want to reset it, and we ignore whatever this method returns. So after this, we're going to return this send email, and we pass this user through as an argument. So again, another method, let's just add the method stub, because we won't be working with this method until we actually create the mail component for our system. I'm going to just type in this argument again here with user, and I'm going to add doc blocks so they are all ready for when we are going to be ready to work with it. It returns Boolean. And the summary will simply say send email. Okay, we can now save and close this register controller. We can save this user, open the file browser, navigate to our tests. We are going to start with the unit, then utilities, and this time our new test is going to be called mail test. So mail test. Hit return, make sure that it's within the app test unit utilities namespace, and it extends our base case. Now before we do anything else, let's open app directory, then we have utilities, and under the utilities we are going to create a new directory called mail, which is where our mail component is going to be located. Now we're going to start with a new PHP class called mail manager. And it's within the app, then utilities and mail namespace. Our mail manager will work as a basically factory for us to generate the instance of the new mail class. So we're going to start with a public static function called make. It will take an array of parameters. By default, it's going to be an empty array. And then we're going to start with the class name equals and then static class name, the method which we create straight away as well. So this private static class name method will simply take the driver first of all, which will be taken from .env get and then index. If we just scroll up, open this .env, you'll see we have mail driver here. By default, it's set to SMTP. If I just copy this mail driver, and I'm going to show you something in just a moment. And if it doesn't exist, if we cannot fetch the value associated with this variable, then we're going to set it by default to SMTP. And let me just show you another thing. If we are within the testing environment, if we open this PHP unit, you'll see that mail driver here is sent to test. So within the live environment, we have SMTP, but when we are testing, this variable will be overwritten and it's going to be set to test. So we get in the driver, which is going to be basically a string, lower case, all letters. And now let's return the namespace, concatenate it with 2 backslashes, and then UC first for the driver. So this will convert this SMTP, for instance, to SMTP, and test would be converted to test. And then we concatenate it with mail. and that's going to be the name of the class that will represent the given driver. So for instance, for SMTP, it's going to be SMTP mail. For test, it's going to be test mail. And obviously prepend it with the full namespace. So we have now the class namespace associated with this variable, but before we do this, let's continue with this. Let's just add the doc block here, get qualifying class name. So we have a class name. Now we're going to return new class name, and we pass any parameters that we want to pass to the constructor of this class. So that's everything from within this mail manager. Let's just quickly add the doc blocks as well. And what it will return, each of these mail classes will extend the mail class. So I'm going to add mail here. This class will be within the same directory. So let's just quickly create it. Mail, and I'm going to leave this class for the time being just like this. And for the summary of this method, I'm going to say get instance of the mail class. Okay, let's save it and close this mail manager, because that's all we need to do from within this class. We only needed this factory method, which will return the instance of the correct mail class. We will have either SMTP or the test mail. So let's just create this straight away as well. It's going to be SMTP mail, which will extend mail class. So we can save it and close it, and then we are going to have test mail, which will also extend this mail class. Okay, save it and close it. So now what we can do is to register a binding for this mail component with a container. And I'm going to do this within the base case class from within this setup before class method, when we have these instances of the other objects binded to the container. Now instance, if I just click on this method, just so you understand what this instance method does, it registers an existing instance as shared in a container. What that means is that every time you are going to call container make and then provide the index, for instance request or guard, it will give you the same instance of the class. Now what I want to do for the mail class, because every time we're going to send mail I want to have a new instance of the class, I need to use the bind method instead. So static container, then bind, and I want to identify this item by index mail, and I'm going to use the closure here function to basically return a mail manager and then make method, which will get me what I want, which will give me the instance of the mail class every time I'm going to call container make with the mail as an argument. I'm going to get the new one, because this closure here will return the new class every time I call it, rather than having the same instance as with the request and guard. With request and a guard, a single instance is just fine, because we don't need to re-instantiate this classes every time we call them. One instance is just fine to use with the application. But when it comes to the mail, obviously every time you create a new mail, you would like to have a new instance of the mail class. Okay, and the same thing while we at it, let's just open our public index.php and also add it here. So container bind mail and then disclosure function. And from within this function, we're going to return mail manager make without any arguments. And I'm going to import this mail manager here, so we have it right at the top. Okay, and that's everything from within this index.php, so we can save it and close it. So now when we are within our test class, we can create a new test and then call it static container make mail, and that will give us the new instance of the mail class every time we call it like this. So the first test we're going to write will verify that we can actually set the from property on the mail instance. So public function correctly sets from property. Let's make it a test. And we start with mail static container make mail. And now we have an instance of a new mail class. We start with mail at from, and we go for info from info ssdtutorials.com and then ssd tutorials. First, we're checking that we can set it as two separate strings, and then we go for this assert equals, and we're expecting to get info ssdtutorials.com associated with ssd tutorials, and we expect to get it when we call, let me just move it on new line, let's indent it, when we call mail get from method. And if it fails, then we're going to say single mail at from called failed to set the from property. Single because this is the first one that we are adding to the list of from fields. You can have multiple ones. So let's run this test, which will obviously fail. So PHP unit, and we're going to run just this one. So test unit utilities mail test, and there we go. Obviously call to undefined method at from. Okay, so let's open, I'm just going to close this base case. Let's open our mail class. The first thing we are going to do from within our mail class is to convert it to an abstract one. So abstract class mail. We won't be instantiating this class on its own. It's always going to be through one of those subclasses, either SMTP mail or test mail. And we're going to start with protected from field, which is going for a property which is going to be of the array type. And I'm going to add the constructor. Constructor will select none here. Constructor will take array of properties, and let's just add it to the doc blocks as well. And from within the constructor, what I'm going to do is run this bind method, and it will pass through new collection, Illuminate support collection, and we pass this properties through as an argument. Now we don't have this bind method, but this bind method could potentially be used with many other classes. So what I'm going to do is to create a trait which will have this method in it. Under the app directory, let's create a new directory called traits, which is where all our traits will be stored. And the first trait we are going to create is going to be called binder. And the namespace is obviously app and then traits. Okay, and this is not a class, it's a trait. So that it can be used with many different classes. And from within this binder, we are going to start with this protected function bind. It takes collection of items, this collection Illuminate support one. So let's go for collection. And what we're going to do here is check if collection is empty, then there's nothing for us to do, so just return. Otherwise, what we're going to do is run through those through this collection. So collection filter, and the callable will be the method within this trait. So this, and the method name will be filter bindings. And then once we have the correct records, once we've filtered all these properties, then what we want to run is each method on all of these values, again delegating this to the internal method called bind properties. And that's it. From within our bind method, let's add these additional methods. So filter bindings, first of all, it's going to be a public function filter bindings. We're going to have a value as the first argument and then key as the second. And what we need to do is to check whether the property with this with the name, which is going to be stored within the key, exists on a given object instance. So return property exists, and we give the instance of the object and then name of the property that we're after, so key. And the other method, so this will basically eliminate any entries within the array that we pass through as an argument to this constructor, which aren't represented by the property on the mail class instance, or obviously SMTP and test as well, because they will extend this mail class. Okay, so that's filter bindings. The other one is bind properties. So the other one is going to be public function bind properties, and we have value again and the key as well. And here we simply do this. Then in between curly brackets or without, it's up to you. I will use curly brackets here. Key, which is going to be representing the property name, and then the value we want to associate with it. And that's everything within this trait. So let's just quickly add some doc blocks for it. It takes collection and it doesn't return anything, so return void and bind properties. Then we have filter bindings. Returns boolean. If using PHP 7, you can add boolean here as well. Obviously, I started this course without this return statement, so I'll just continue the same way. Then we have the key will be of a string type. The value might be anything, so mixed. And the summary will be get only items that represent existing properties. And then for the bind properties, the parameters will be value will be mixed again, key is going to be of a string type, and summary is going to be bind value to the property, or with the property, or to the property. I'm going to give it like this. Okay, so that's our binding completed. Let's now save it and close it. Now from within the main class, let's use this binder. So use binder. There we go. Make sure that you import this binder at the top. My IDE automatically did it. So as you can see now, this bind method isn't highlighted anymore because we have access to it. Now what happens with our test? We still haven't got this add from and get from methods. So we've got a constructor sorted within our mail class. Let's now add this add from and get from methods, which is basically a setter and getter, because our properties are all protected. So in order to get the value associated with a given property, we need to have basically mutator and accessor, or setter and getter. Let's start with the public function add from. The first argument is going to be email, and the second will be name, which by default is going to be set to null. Email is going to be required, name not. And then we're going to delegate the call to this email name method, and we pass email as first argument, then name as second argument, and then the property we want to associate it with. So this from. We don't have this email name method yet, but before we do this, let's create this getter as well for this from property, public function get from, and this will simply return this from. Let's add some doc blocks to it as well. It takes email, which is of a string type. Name is going to be either null or string as well. And we are going to say add from option, or add from, no, I think I'm going to keep it like this. Okay, and then returns array get from option. Okay, so let's add this email name method, but before we do this, I've just noticed this email is attribute might be of a string type, but it might also be an array. So let's put the pipe here and specify that it might be an array as well. Okay, email name, and I'm going to move this method before this add from. And what we're going to have here is email name is going to be null by default, and then this from we are going to convert to property, but it will be passed through as a reference, so property, so that we can actually affect whatever we are passing through as this third argument. So if we pass in this property here, then we will be able to add to this property, basically to this array. Okay, so from here we are going to check if is array, and we check this email. Actually, rather than email, let's make it emails. And the same here for this from emails, 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 because there might be multiple emails than just one. So if it's an array, then we are going to delegate this to another method, email name array, and we pass this emails through as an argument, and then just a property, because we're not going to be bothered with the name at this point. If it's an array, then we know the second argument is not going to be there. Okay, and after this we just hit return, so we terminate here. Otherwise we're going to go for name equals if is not exclamation mark is null name, then we use it, so name. Otherwise we are going to use emails, so we basically going to later on associate with the property emails equals name. So in this case, obviously if it's an array, we're going to delegate it to another method, but if it's not, then we check if the name is not null, at which point we are going to use it. Otherwise we're going to use email basically. So if we pass through just an email, then we're going to have it for the key and the value. Okay, let's add this email name array method. So private function email name array, and this one will take array of emails this time. We know it's an array at this point, and then again reference property. Okay, and here what we're going to do is run the for each emails as email equals name, and let's add the brackets. And the first thing we're going to do here is check if the key, which is this email here, is of a string type. So if it's not string email, then we are going to use the name as email. So email equals name, and then we simply associate with the property. So property email name. There we go. Let me just explain what happens here. So we're looping through these emails, and we could pass these emails as this first argument to this email name in the following format. We could have it as info.me.com, for instance, and then name. We could also pass it as just email address. We could obviously pass it as string as well, which obviously would then trigger this following statement and so on. But as an array, we can have it either as a single array item or have it associated with a value. So we could have email as the key and then name as a value. If we pass it like this, then obviously this email here will be represented by this index, and name will be represented by the name. At this point, this will fail, and we'll simply pass the email to as a key and the name as the value of this array. For this obviously property, whichever property we are passing through at this point, we are in this specific case, for the add from, we're passing this from property here. But if we pass it only as an email without strictly associating any keys, then this condition here isn't string will evaluate to true, because by default PHP will associate numerical value for the key. At which point obviously this email here key will be overwritten with the name, which a name now is represented by this email address, because values are represented when we don't have multi-dimensional arrays. Then obviously keys are numerical and values are whatever we are passing through. So this name now becomes this email, and this is why we're associating this name with the email to then pass it as a key, and then we would have basically email equals email in this case. Okay, so that's what this method does. Let's now add some dog blocks here. Array of emails property is going to be of the array type as well. And what it does is associate array of email property types. And for our email name, some dog blocks here as well. Property is going to be of the array type. Name is going to be the null or string. Emails is going to be either string or array. And for the summary, let's add associate email property type. Okay, so now at this point our add from and get from should work. So let's run the test again. And there we go, one test, one assertion. Let's now go back to our test and add all these other case scenarios. So we are going to add new one. I'm going to duplicate this add from and then assertion. And for the add from, this time I'm going to only pass email address. And what I expect to get, it's not going to be info because we already have this index. So I'm going to add seb now. And what I should have at this point is seb equals seb. So email equals email. And this is a call to set the second property from property. Let's save it and run it. And there we go, one test, two assertions, so that works fine. Now, if we try again, let's duplicate this. The next way that we can pass values through as arguments is going to be using the array, like this. And let's change this name to say Nathan now equals Nathan Zulinski, for instance. And how we are expecting to get it now with the previous records, it should be like this. We're passing key and then a value, and that's how it should be associated. And let's just change the message, set the third from property. Let's run the test, and there we go, 3 assertions, all of which are passing, which is great. Back to the editor. The next way that we can actually pass this value through would be as just email address within the array. So let's do it like this. Now let's change name to say Chris. So we would expect it to be this way. And that's 4th attempt. Save it, test it. There we go, 4 assertions. And the last one we are going to test, if we just duplicate all this, we have, let's say, Pete. And then another one after this, comma, let's say Josh. So what we should have now would be Pete equals Pete, and then Josh equals Josh. There we go. And that's the 4th, 5th attempt. Okay, save it, run the test, and all of these are working just fine. So as you can see, there are so many different ways that you can pass argument to this add from method now, and they all should work just fine.